Thank you for having me. I do confuse people because people ask me where I'm from and I say New Zealand and they look at me funny because I do not have a New Zealand accent. Closer to you all, originally from Edinburgh, but moved over to New Zealand nearly 20 years ago. But I don't think I'll ever lose the accent. Um, I don't know if I think I did see Ravi was on the call, so I don't know if he heard my call, this talk at UDiv. It is slightly different. Um, but the I thought it would be great to share it, and I've adapted a little bit for this. Let me just click through. So yeah, as I say, I'm Pete. I'm from Wellington. I don't know if anybody here has been to Wellington in New Zealand. It's known as it's got a nickname called Windy Wellington. So if you ever land here, it's rated as one of the windiest airports to land at. So that's our sign as you arrive in. I work for a digital agency called Effect. That's our team there. So we're a sort of full service digital agency, specialise in Umbraco. So we do everything from design, development, and support. Um, Work with a range of clients across government, private sector, and we do a lot in the environmental data space. So that's just a bit of an example. Some of the work we do. Um, Today, I'm going to talk about emergency management and what we do in that and why we think it's important and especially around the accessibility of it. Wanted to touch a little bit on climate disasters. We've seen a lot of that in the news. This was in LA recently. They had some of the worst wildfires they've ever had, and the devastation that that caused there. Um, the In Australia, recently they had a massive cyclone that came in, actually destroyed whole sections off the beach. Closer to home in New Zealand, this was on our west coast of New Zealand. They're quite prone to flooding. This was actually a bridge that got washed out. So I don't know if anybody's been to New Zealand. There's some glaciers. A lot of people visit, and this bridge actually washed out, and tourists got stuck there for a long time. And more recently, this was in Auckland, and they had some really bad floods that you might have seen in the news in the UK, and that was devastating. And I think what we see from a lot of this is these become more frequent, right? They're becoming more severe. These things that are happening. I'm just going to fix my mouse. Give me 1 second. Sorry, my mouse has moved onto my iPad, which is very annoying because then I can't move on to the screen. Bear with me 1 second. 1 second. Sorry about that. There we go. The mouse is back. So, I want to talk a little bit about what we do in the emergency management space. So in the UK, you might call it civil defence. So New Zealand's got 16 different authorities or agencies that look after different parts of the country. So if you think about New Zealand, you've got like Auckland up at the top, you've got Wellington sort of in the middle, Christchurch right down to sort of the bottom of the South Island and Southland, Dunedin. So these have all got different areas and they all have different people that look after them. They've all got different challenges. They're all funded differently through the government, and they look after different areas and they have different hazards. Um, and one of the things we work with a lot of clients on is these stages of a response. So you have these different stages that it's quite a common framework in New Zealand. So readiness is all about preparedness, getting people prepared for the content. Warnings, giving people, something might happen. Rain's a common one in New Zealand. Could be a big rain event happening. Um, and then you move into a response, and I'll touch a little bit that on later on. So that's maybe when you're in a state of emergency or a major event's happening, like some of the ones I showed you. And then you transition to this recovery where you're sort of going between response and recovery. And then you go back to readiness. So you have to sort of cater for all these different use cases, and they are quite different in type in terms of the information that you have. One of the things you'll see here, this is an example of one of the emergency management sites in New Zealand. This is in Auckland. This is quite generic content built in Umbraco. There's news articles on here. There's information. It's all about people getting prepared, finding out about severe weather, being informed, understanding risks, making plans, getting other information through formats. It's all very, getting everything in place for when something happens. And people in different agencies in New Zealand treat this differently. But it's a really important step because of New Zealand, there's a lot of events that can impact us. So things like earthquakes, and you don't know when they're going to happen, right? Especially an earthquake, it can just happen, or flooding or wind. We're on an island. So there is a lot of effort that goes into the country to make sure people are prepared for when an event happens. But what I wanted to talk around a little bit was when something does happen, what are the kind of things you want to think about in terms of design and the accessibility principles for emergencies? Because it is, we think, a little bit different in terms of some of the content that you want to think about. So, first one is the content itself. So, a big thing is thinking about the user's environment. So, if you think if you're using a website and it's during the day, and whether it be on, going onto your online banking or buying your groceries or reading the news, you're usually in a comfortable environment when you're doing that. You're maybe at home, you're in the office, you're maybe in a calm situation. But when an emergency happens, it can actually be quite jarring because you may be, under high stress, you may be not at home, you may be trying to find information really quickly. So actually that has quite a big impact, and it's something that we actually test with users. So we're almost trying to simulate what that is like. The the next part is around the content and how that's been written. The In New Zealand, I don't know if they have it in the UK, they have actually something called the Plain English Awards, and that's around how content's written on the site. So making it really simple. The guidance being make sure the content's written for children so they can understand it, make it not complicated, don't use big words. So a lot of focus goes into actually the content that's being created. So not just making sure the website's accessible, but the content's accessible as well. The the other part is the hierarchy of the content. I'll touch on this a little bit later on, but you'll see in this diagram here, we recently did a whole bunch of user testing. I think we went out and spoke to 400 different people, and we basically grouped all the different types of content you could have on an emergency management website and got them to rank what is the most important. And people want information that's really important at that time to them. But they also want to access different information. So actually thinking about how in an emergency, the most important content is visible and easy for people to read and access. And then other information is available if people want it, but they maybe have to click down to another page to get there. Again, just taking away that friction. So when people access the information, they can get it straight away. The next part after content is actually thinking about the content authors. Now, if anybody here has worked on a web project, if you did a project kickoff and you ask people what's the most important thing, generally content authors is not top of the list. They're thinking about, quite rightly, the users. One of the things we thought and found is when you're trying to design something that you want it to be as accessible as you can for as many people to access as possible, in an emergency, people are putting up content up quickly. They're also operating under high stress. In the example I talked about a little bit earlier on, when the Auckland flooding happened, they were called in the middle of the night. It was a sort of unexpected flash flood. So people were out of bed. They had people on call who maybe weren't as familiar with the website. It's actually putting a lot of thought into how the content management system is set up is really important because it can aid for that. And it just takes away, again, talk about that friction, less friction for them creating the content. Also creating prompts and guides. So where you can, make the CMS as easy as possible, but guide them, put effort into having tags within there, labels within there. So if people are coming in that are not familiar, they know, I know how to do this, and they can do it almost, if they're half asleep, because sometimes that is when they're doing it. All goes back to that, making it as easy as possible to put the best type of content out there. Another part's training. One of the things we found is, you can go 6 months without having to go through an emergency and putting your site and putting that kind of emergency content up. So actually keeping people trained on how to do that and almost refreshers. So in New Zealand, assuming similar in the UK and other areas, they'll do what we call like tabletop exercises. So they did one in Auckland recently, and I think it was the biggest one they've ever run. So they had people like the Red Cross in there, the police, the ambulance, fire, the emergency management in Auckland, and they actually simulate a response. So they say, hey, something's happened, we're going to open up civil defence centres, we're going to get food banks open. So they actually simulate everything. But a lot of the time, the digital part's actually ignored. They focus on the physical part. So this was a picture, John, one of our designers down in Canterbury, in the Emergency Operations Centre, where we'll take the whole team through a digital response. So we'll take them through the training, the content, the creation, the tips and tricks, will answer questions. They might have new people, make sure people have got the right access, check the content that's in there. And I'll talk a little bit on that around being prepared for the content before it happens. So we found that like super valuable. Again, just keeps it front of mind for people. And again, everybody, the more preparation you have and more comfortable it is, the more chance they've got to make sure the content and what's being put in out there and what's been set up is accessible for everybody, because content does change, it does age over time. Different people come in. One of the things we see as well is people move around a lot within New Zealand. So they have what we call PIMs, or public information managers. So if there's a major event happening, you may call in a PIM from somewhere else in the country to help, and they might not be familiar with what you've done, or they've changed roles. So actually making sure people are familiar with it and how the site's run up, so they know, oh, this needs to be done like that, or they can give feedback. So super important, always try and make sure people are familiar with the website and how it's used. Next part, connectivity. It's an interesting one, I think. Generally we're all pretty good these days. We've got, fiber at home, we're on 5G connections, we're all pretty used to, traffic a lot is on mobile, like the previous speaker was talking about. A lot of people are doing things on their mobile phone. What we see in emergency, that goes up even more, because people are on the go, they've maybe lost power, they're not going to get their laptop out, they're going to pick up their phone and get something, they're going to look at their phone to get the most important information. So having things designed for mobile. Also thinking about the bandwidth. So people may have lower poor bandwidth. So thinking about the type of content that is on the website during an emergency, making sure it's easy, quick for the phones to download, not large images. Again, simple content being easy to read and accessible for people means they can just access it really quickly. The other thing we see as well is some people don't have data plans, so they can't actually access the content. One of the things they have, I don't know if they have it in the UK, is we have zero data initiative. So what can happen is if an agency or a government department, they can actually say all the access to this site is free, and essentially they pick up the data bill from the various like telcos like Vodafone or Orange in the UK. If they're still, can't remember if they're still telcos there, or when I was there. They're the ones that send the bill to the different agencies to pay. And again, it's removing the barrier. It means anybody can access it. If it's important, everybody can access the content. So it's, again, making it accessible to everybody. And test it. This is just a testing tool here. It's pretty standard. Actually testing how the device works in the different network situations. So like you can see here in the little screenshot, it's got poor reception, 3G. Actually seeing how it performs and really testing that content. So people, are they getting access to it? Is it accessible for everybody? This is just an interesting, there's a little graph around when Auckland had some increased traffic on the site. It's one of the things is you usually find in these situations, traffic's like sometimes nothing because it's a preparedness site. It's very low, not a lot of people are on there, but then everybody goes on the site. So everybody has to access the site. Everybody wants to access the site quickly. We see as well in New Zealand we have emergency text alert, so that'll send alert out to people in a geographic area and say, hey, something's happened, and usually it tells everybody go and visit the website. So again, making sure the website's ready, geared up, and that the pages that are being linked to on those phones are also accessible and are well set up so people can actually access that content. And that the site's performing, it's been tested, because the last thing you want to do is you put all that effort into having accessible content and then something happens. So this was like some testing we were doing. So we were like trying to throttle the site, see what kind of responses we could get, something that we try and do regularly. Next one is like best practice. Now, I'm not a developer, so I'm not going to talk about code things. The developers at my company tell me off when I talk about code things. But like good practice, the last speaker, he talked a lot about that around making sure all the good things that you need to do in the code happens, right? Whether it's putting tags in there, putting your alt text on your images, all those things need to happen. And it needs to be, and it has to be repeated all the time. Coming from an agency, it can be quite challenging from trying to convince some clients, it costs money and time to invest in this and taking them on the journey. And you can only sometimes control part of that. The content might sit on the client side, but everything that sits with us and our ownership of the code, we can take some pride in. So just making sure you are instilling those good practices within the team and also working with clients. Speaking to users, like testing users, getting feedback from users, again, super important. A lot of what we will do is, go out, speak to people. We're quite lucky in New Zealand. I'm going to touch on this a little bit later on. Recently done a large project, design project, where we had the opportunity to go and speak to different groups across New Zealand. So we had the opportunity to work with the Blind Foundation in New Zealand, and get access to different user groups with disabilities or accessibility requirements. So we could really actually get some real-time feedback from people and help shape the solutions that we're doing. So I think any opportunity, anything that's been built, get it in front of real users to get feedback in, removes biases and assumptions, and can give you really valuable feedback to the solutions. Support for alternative formats. I'm just going to show this little site in New Zealand. It's not one we've built. So this is a get ready site. So similar to what I was talking about earlier on around this preparedness. This was built by the national agency, and they've put a lot of effort into making this very accessible. So you can see they've got multiple languages that's available. New Zealand's got a lot of visitors, tourists come here, so they all need to know what to do. So making sure that's all available to people. They can have different versions, so they can either download it a Braille format, a large print version. So they've got all these different formats in there, making it really easy for people to do it. They spend a lot of money making sure this is really well tested, both from an accessibility point of view. I think the great thing with this is they're really open for all the groups in New Zealand to work with it, like at a national level. So they can invest the money into creating all these alternative formats and accessible content and allow the different groups around the country to draw on that expertise because they've obviously got the leverage being a bigger agency. So I think, they've done like a really good job at this, which is, I think a great example. So thinking about going back to the stages of the response, I talked a little bit at the start about that sort of readiness, and then we sort of talked a little bit about some of those principles. I want to sort of touch on these middle sections now about warning and response. So generally, if I'll go back a slide, you have the warning stage. So this is before something major happens. You're just giving people advice. So we use alerts. Alerts are great, easy way on the site to make it easy for people to see. Obviously, not everybody can see the color, so making it prominent. So obviously, we've got color in there to be read. We've aligned them with the meteorological service in New Zealand in terms of the color coding they use. So if they're using red or amber, people will recognize that. But obviously, as I say, people may be colorblind. They see the color. They can still see there's something different on that site. And it goes back to that sort of trusted source of the truth for content. We're linking off to like official sources. And it's highlighting the key information. So people coming to the site, they know something's happening, they know they need to deal with it, and then go and get further information. We built a cool thing with this, a CAP feed integration. So a CAP feed's a common alerting protocol. And what that allows is every time our Met service or your Met office in the UK would publish a weather alert, it automatically gets published to the website. Again, making sure people can access the key information and relying on the meteorological service who have all the funding and they've got all the content on their site, so we can direct people off to that. But it means that on this site, if something happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, the site automatically is going to publish, hey, there's a weather alert. So again, removing that barrier for people, making the content, going back to that content author, what I was talking about, making their job a little bit easier. To do that. And we've also built the ability to toggle it off and on because some people get a bit freaked out when there's a off and on when something automatically gets published on their website. So some people, we've built the button so they can turn it off. Going back to that, again, making it simple for people. So this is one thing that I think we've built. It's a little bit unique. We call it response mode. So as I talked about, the content changes. So if you're in an awareness to an emergency, the type of content and information people need is different, but the URL and the websites are the same because you can't change the URL. So, hey, if it's an emergency, go here. So you can see here on the left is the Taranaki Emergency Management website. They've got a rain alert warning, but it's a pretty standard site. But in the event of, say, there was severe flooding and they've declared a state of emergency, we've developed this different mode called response mode. Again, we've taken a lot of the images away, made the content really easy to see, used iconography so people can identify what's happening with it, and just made the content really prominent and got away off a lot of as I say, things aren't needed. Helps with reading, helps with that performance that I was talking around. People are on mobile phones, low bandwidth, low data. They can get the information they need as quickly as possible. Again, enabling response mode, something that we've spent a lot of time working on, going back to that content author, making it as easy as they can. So it's got a switch. So you can see here, if you're familiar with Umbraco or any other CMS, you got the little nav, we've got a mode. You click a button, pick your template, and refresh. I've got a little video, and you'll see in a second, and the website changes. The beauty with this is these templates here, you'll see there's a flooding one and an earthquake one. These are all pre-built. So before enough event happened, they've actually invested the time in creating these like really good templates. They have all the accessible content in there. They can make sure they hit the highest standards. So when an event happens, literally they are clicking two buttons. We're trying to even get that down to one button at the moment. And they can control the permissions on it. So only certain people can manage that. Again, super valuable when something happens that they can actually rapidly change it. So I think here, this is just a little example. So this is the Taranaki website. So if something's happened, they've popped into the back end. They've said, oh, I'm going to enable it. They're going to pick their template. They're going to say it's a response, it's flooding. They're going to publish it, and then they're going to refresh the homepage, and then the site's flipped. So really easy. Content's changed. Everybody's aware it's a different type of information. Super important for people to see. And then if they want to turn it back, they can flip it back. So yeah, we're quite proud of that. It's been quite successful over the years, and used quite a lot for different situations. I think one of the things is you can learn. You got to always learn and improve, right? We've had this response mode. I think we first built it in 2018, and we've got a few little iterations on that, and we wanted to do more, and we wanted to keep improving it. I think in Auckland, this was Auckland Airport when they had the flooding in 2022. So if anybody's flown into Auckland Airport International, you probably had drier feet than you would have had on that day. There was so many learnings as a country that came out of that about how to respond to a major event. And Auckland got hit actually with two events back to back. So they had flooding and then a cyclone. So they had massive damage. So there was a real appetite in the country. There was some parliamentary reports and commissions done to understand what was going on. But we seen an opportunity to say, well, there's things that we learned about things we didn't do very well. We've seen things that happen from a content point of view. And one of the things we noticed, I mentioned earlier around these HIM, public information managers, they moved around the country. So we've seen these people were coming to Auckland to help out, but they had never used the content management system. They hadn't used Umbraco. They had used maybe Drupal or Silverstripe or even Squarespace. So they were sort of familiar with it, but they weren't clear. They were like, oh, how do I publish an alert? It really slowed down content going out. So we were like, well, there's something we can do here. So we had this idea. We were like, well, what about if we created this emergency response design system? So we've submitted some funding, they had some grants. Unfortunately, we didn't get the grant the first time around, but we were not deterred. And we partnered with one of the other emergency management groups in New Zealand and managed to get funding from NEMA. And we've been doing this over the last 3 months. We're just sort of wrapping up at the moment. And what we've been really lucky to do is work with groups across the country to really test this stuff and go deep on a user research project. So you'll see here, we've got all these different types of content. So this was referred to earlier around what is the type of content people want to see, what's the priority on it, getting some really good specifications and designs, and actually going out and testing it with user groups. So taking user groups through the new designs, taking content offers through it. So it's really created this massive design system, and we've designed it in a way that's agnostic of technology. So we would love people to use our technology. We'd love people to use Umbraco, but we've started taking a view of saying, well, we actually want to create something that's sort of universal for New Zealand and potentially beyond. So we're in the process of creating this design system, which we're using Confluence for. So people can actually go in there and start seeing things like what are good practice for accessibility. So if you're a smaller maybe agency or group, you can actually get access to all this information and research that we've done. So again, super powerful, and like really like proud of what we've done. You'll see here, I think it's just a little mobile Figma video, and we're in the process of building the 2.0 of the response mod. So you can see there we've started to incorporate some of the new features that you'd seen in the other example of it, different types of content available to download on the phone, having the different menus in there so people can access different information at different times. So yeah, really happy with this. As I say, it's going to be something that we're rolling out. We're also going to be working with creating a working group with the different agencies across the country to try and leverage some of the learnings because a lot of people have the same challenges. And you know, in New Zealand, emergency management, especially in digital space, isn't that well funded. So we're in a sort of a unique position that we sort of sit in the middle of that and can really help the different groups. So we want to be able to say there, you know, if we want to add a new feature, we can actually leverage those features across the groups, which saves money, saves learning, and ultimately helps deliver a better product for people. And that means that time and money can be invested into making sure it is meeting the highest levels of accessibility, training, and we can really make a really good product that everybody in the country can benefit from. Um, so yeah, that's sort of the end of that. And I think, yeah, the key message is just, I think in the creation of content, this is obviously I've talked a lot about emergencies, is really thinking about the audience and when they're accessing it and how that is different at different times and different situations and how the content needs to differ to make sure it is accessible and can be understood and read for everybody and understood and read by anyone on the site. So yeah, hopefully that was of interest to people. Happy if, you know, drop me a note on Zoom if you've got any questions. It is late here, so I'll be on the panel, but I'll be offline after that. But I will be over at Code Garden next month, so if anybody's there and you have questions, happy to reach out to me. But thank you for listening.